There is a particular kind of pain that doesn't scream. It doesn't shout for attention. It doesn't rage or retaliate. It simply exists quietly, heavily, deeply. It sits in the chest like a stone that refuses to move. And the most tragic part? It's not caused by strangers or enemies. It's inflicted by those you defended when no one else would, by those you stayed loyal to even when they gave you every reason to walk away. Loyalty, it's a beautiful word, isn't it? But only when it's mutual. When it isn't, it becomes a curse disguised as virtue. You were loyal beyond reason. You forgave what most people wouldn't. You showed up even when you were breaking inside. You held the line for people who would have gladly let you fall. You listened to their silence, endured their moods, absorbed their anger, and told yourself it was just you stayed when everyone else walked away. And for that, they laughed. They didn't just take your loyalty for granted. No, they mocked it. They mocked your patience, your silence, your sacrifices. They mistook your kindness for weakness, your endurance for naivety. They assumed that because you didn't retaliate, you didn't feel, that because you stayed quiet, you didn't see. But you saw everything. You felt everything. You just carried it alone. There's a haunting cruelty in being mocked for your goodness. It's one thing to be hurt by someone. It's another thing entirely to be laughed at for loving them, to be told explicitly or through action that your loyalty was foolish, that your devotion made you a joke, and yet you stayed, not because you were weak, but because you were strong enough to love without condition. And that kind of strength is terrifying to those who live without integrity. But let's ask a difficult question. What does it do to a person to be mocked for their loyalty, to be made to feel stupid for loving deeply? It erodes something sacred. It warps their sense of self. It makes them question their worth. Was I wrong to stay? Did I not see the truth soon enough? Was my love misplaced? Wasted? And these questions linger in the soul like shadows in a room that never gets light. But here's the deeper truth. The universe and whatever divine structure governs it is not blind. There is a justice woven into the fabric of reality that cannot be escaped. And those who mocked your loyalty will one day mourn it. They will search for it in others and never find it. They will cry out for the same kind of devotion you once gave freely and be met with silence. And in that silence, they will finally understand the depth of what they destroyed. You see, the cost of betrayal is rarely immediate. It's delayed. It creeps in slowly. It waits until the one who was hurt has healed, risen, and moved forward. That's when karma speaks. And when it speaks, it doesn't shout. It whispers truth into the lives of those who once mocked you. And in that moment, they are forced to remember your loyalty. But by then, it's too late. Now the time has come, not for revenge, but for reflection, for letting those who once mocked your heart cry out for it in your absence. You don't need to prove your worth to anyone. The pain you carried, the sacrifices you made, and the silence you endured, they were not signs of weakness. They were evidence of your strength. Your loyalty was never the joke. Their betrayal was. So let them cry now. Let them sit with their choices. Let them search for what you gave and never find it again. Because while you were breaking in silence, they were laughing out loud. But now, the silence is theirs to carry. And as we explore the full weight of this experience, let us uncover the patterns, the truths, and the outcomes of what happens when loyalty is mocked and love is betrayed, because the pain you carried in silence was not without meaning, and now justice is echoing through the silence they once ignored. They took your silence as surrender. There comes a moment in every wounded soul's journey where silence becomes the only language left. It's not because you didn't have anything to say, it's because you had said everything already. Through your actions, your sacrifices, your presence, and still, they didn't hear you. So you went silent, not out of defeat, but out of exhaustion, not because you gave up, but because you were tired of giving everything and receiving nothing in return. They saw that silence and smiled. They saw your withdrawal, and interpreted it as surrender. How foolish they were to believe that quiet meant brokenness, that retreat meant defeat, that your stillness was weakness, but they were wrong, so very wrong. You see, silence is often the space where strength gathers. It's the ground where warriors heal, where hearts recalibrate, and where dignity takes root. You weren't waving a white flag. You were rebuilding the very soul they tried to fracture. You weren't walking away in shame. You were walking inward to protect what was left of yourself. And in doing so, you proved a kind of power they'll never comprehend. But they didn't understand that. No, they looked at you and thought they had won. They believed they had broken the person who once bent over backward for them. The one who absorbed insult after insult, who forgave not once or twice, but more times than you can count. They thought your silence was the final stage of your defeat. What they couldn't see was that behind that silence was a storm, a gathering force of truth, realization, and painful clarity. You were waking up, slowly, deeply, painfully, but surely. And while you were quiet, you were remembering everything, the way they dismissed your pain, the way they made jokes out of your vulnerability, the way they twisted your loyalty into something pathetic, something laughable, and it hurt. God, it hurt. But you stayed silent because screaming wouldn't change the outcome. You knew that now. Have you ever held in a scream so loud it made your chest ache? Have you ever sat across from someone who hurt you and pretended like everything was okay just to keep the peace? Have you ever carried so much emotion in silence that it felt like your ribs would snap under the weight of unspoken pain? That's not weakness. That's power. That's control. That's endurance forged in fire. They will never understand the nights you cried into your pillow, questioning your worth. They will never see the way you replayed their words over and over, wondering how love turned into cruelty. They will never feel the tremors in your soul each time they mocked you behind your back, thinking you were too soft to fight back. But your silence wasn't because you lacked the strength to fight. It was because you had the wisdom to know it wasn't worth it anymore. And that kind of restraint, that level of emotional control, that is terrifying to those who thrive on chaos and manipulation. That is strength wrapped in grace. They laughed because they thought they won, but what they actually witnessed was the beginning of their loss. Because when the person who gave you everything grows silent, it's not peace, it's a warning. It's the calm before the justice. The calm before karma arrives to collect. And now, as the silence stretches longer, they begin to feel it. That emptiness, that absence, that strange, haunting realization that the one they thought they defeated is the one they'll never get back. And suddenly, they're the ones screaming, but this time it's inside themselves, and no one's listening. You love them more than they deserved love. When it is real, does not measure. It doesn't count the costs. It doesn't keep a record of how many times it was ignored or how many nights it went unreciprocated. Real love gives and gives and gives. And that's what you did. You poured your soul into someone who barely even held out their hands to receive it. You gave them a place in your heart that was sacred, a place you rarely opened to anyone, and they walked in like they owned it, then trampled everything. You loved them more than they ever earned. You gave them more chances than they ever deserved. You forgave them when you had every right to walk away. You defended them when others tried to warn you. You believed their lies because you wanted their truth. You saw glimpses of who they could be and fell in love with the potential while they made no effort to become that person. It wasn't that you were blind. No, you saw the red flags. You felt the distance. You sensed the changes, but you loved them through it. You told yourself, they're just going through something, or they'll realize one day what I mean to them. You excused the disrespect. You minimized your pain. You carried the relationship when they dropped it again and again. And all the while, they knew. They knew you would stay. They knew you would forgive. They knew your heart was wide open, and they treated it like it was disposable. There's a brutal kind of sorrow that comes with realizing you weren't loved back, not even close to how deeply you loved them. You offered them loyalty, They offered you manipulation. You gave them your whole heart. They gave you pieces of themselves, scattered, cold, and incomplete. And yet, even in your breaking, you searched for ways to understand them, to give them one more chance, to see the best in them, even when they showed you their worst. That kind of love, selfless, unconditional, relentless, is rare. It's precious. It's not a weakness. It's a strength most people will never be capable of. And instead of honoring that, they took it for granted. They treated it like background noise, something they could always come back to when the world grew quiet, something they could use when convenient, then discard when they felt powerful again. But love is not a convenience. It is not a commodity. And one day they will feel the weight of what they lost. Because here's the truth. No one can replace the kind of love you gave them. They will search for it. They will try to find it in others, in fleeting connections, in shallow conversations, in temporary validation, in temporary validation, but they won't find it, because what you offered came from a depth they never deserved to reach, a depth they mocked, dismissed, and drained, and they will remember. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but when life turns on them, when the emptiness creeps in, when their soul aches for something real, they'll think of you. They'll remember the one who stayed, the one who loved them too much, the one who believed in them when no one else did. And in that moment, they'll feel the sting of what they destroyed. They will look back and wonder how they could have been so blind, so foolish, so careless. And you, by then, will have nothing left to give, because you don't go back to the place that burned you, even if it once felt like home. And that is where the regret begins. They built comfort on your sacrifice. Some people only know peace because someone else paid for it. They live comfortably, confidently, even carelessly, not because they built that stability themselves, but because someone quietly laid the foundation beneath their feet. That someone was you. You were the one holding everything together, even when everything inside you was falling apart. You were the one absorbing the weight of their moods, their silence, their emotional immaturity. You adjusted, you compromised, you stayed calm when they erupted. You kept showing up even when they had stopped trying long ago. They never noticed the cracks forming inside you because you never let them see you bleed. And they mistook that as strength they didn't have to respect. They built a life around your emotional labor. They rested while you worried. They thrived while you struggled. They found safety in your consistency while giving you instability in return. You became their emotional shield, taking the blows, covering their flaws, making excuses to others for their behavior, always being the buffer between them and the consequences they should have faced themselves. They didn't thank you. They didn't recognize the cost of your patience. They didn't see the fatigue in your eyes, the exhaustion in your smile. Why would they? You made it look easy. You made your sacrifice feel seamless. That's the twisted part of loving deeply. When you give so well, people begin to assume it's your job to do so. And the truth is, without your presence, their peace would have collapsed. It wasn't the relationship that made them feel secure. It was your ability to hold it together. It was your constant effort to keep conversations going. Your endless emotional availability, your willingness to carry the weight of two hearts while they barely took care of one. And that stability they felt, that peace they lived in, it didn't come free. It came at the expense of your own well-being. Have you ever walked into a room and instantly felt the pressure to keep it calm, to watch your tone, manage your expressions, avoid certain topics, just so things don't fall apart? That's what you did every day. You tiptoed around their moods. You adjusted your needs. You carried the unspoken responsibility of keeping things function. And still, they dared to mock your loyalty. They laughed at your kindness. They ridiculed your devotion. They made you feel foolish for loving them too much, when in reality, your love was the only thing keeping them from falling into the chaos of their own making. But now that you're gone or silent or distant, things feel different, don't they? The peace isn't there. The conversations feel empty. The home feels cold. The comfort they once felt no longer exists, because it was never the relationship that gave them that safety. It was you. It was your sacrifice, your heart, your effort. And now that it's missing, they're starting to feel the truth. They don't know how to carry the weight alone. They don't know how to be emotionally present. They don't know how to offer what you once gave freely because they never learned to build it. They only learned to benefit from it. You gave them something sacred, a soft place to land, a heart that stayed open even after being hurt, a presence that never wavered even in storms, and they used it like a resource that would never run dry, but it did, because even the strongest hearts have limits. And when the comfort fades, when the silence grows louder, when the weight gets too heavy, they will finally realize what you were, what you gave, what they lost. Their mockery was projection of guilt. Mockery is a strange weapon. It disguises insecurity as superiority. It cloaks guilt in sarcasm. It hides truth beneath laughter. When they mocked you, your loyalty, your patience, your willingness to stay and love despite the pain, it wasn't because they genuinely thought you were weak. It was because, deep down, they knew they didn't deserve what you gave. But instead of facing that truth, they buried it beneath their ridicule. You see, people don't laugh at what they don't recognize. They laugh to escape what makes them uncomfortable. And what made them uncomfortable was you. Not because you did something wrong, but because your presence exposed everything they were not. Your loyalty magnified their disloyalty. Your consistency revealed their instability. Your compassion was a mirror to their cruelty. And rather than looking into that mirror and confronting themselves, they chose the easier route. They mocked you. They said you were too emotional, too sensitive, too available. They rolled their eyes at your kindness, dismissed your efforts, and turned your care into a punchline. But if you look closely, their mockery was loudest in the moments you stood your ground, when you stayed loyal despite their silence, when you forgave them one more time after another mistake. That's when their laughter was sharpest, not because they had power over you, but because they were losing control of the narrative, and that scared them. It's a twisted form of self-defense. If they can make you look foolish, then they don't have to admit that they were cruel. If they can convince others you were too much, then they don't have to own the fact that they were never enough. If they can turn your love into something laughable, then they don't have to accept that they ruined something sacred. But you felt it, didn't you? The sting of being laughed at for loving, the ache of having your pure intentions thrown back at you like they were worthless. You wondered if maybe you were too much. Maybe you should have loved less, cared less, given less. That's the poison of mockery. It makes the innocent question their purity and the strong question their value. And yet, the truth always lingers beneath the noise. The truth that they knew you were rare. They knew you were real. And that's why they ran. That's why they mocked. Because facing you meant facing their own failure to love. Facing you meant confronting the guilt that kept them up at night. The guilt of knowing they had something beautiful and destroyed it out of carelessness. So they masked that guilt with jokes, with silence, with indifference. But guilt is not a ghost that leaves when ignored. It festers, it grows, it waits. And now, without your light, without your presence to deflect it, that guilt sits heavy on their shoulders. And it's not so funny anymore. Because when they told stories about you, mocking your devotion behind closed doors, it wasn't just you they were speaking to, it was themselves. It was the part of them that knows they failed, the part of them that still hears your voice, that still remembers the way you stayed, the way you loved, the way you forgave. And no matter how loud they laugh, it will never drown out the echo of what they lost. They called you weak, but it was your strength that frightened them. They said you were foolish, but it was their own foolishness they couldn't bear to face. And every time they mocked your heart, they were revealing what theirs lacked. They were search for another you and fail. There's a certain kind of love that imprints itself on a person's soul, not because of what it demands, but because of how freely it is given. You were that kind of love, the rare kind, the kind that doesn't just fill a space, it transforms it. You weren't just someone they knew, you were a safe place, a steady presence, a living example of what it means to love someone beyond their brokenness. And now they've lost that. They didn't realize at the time. They thought they had options. They believed people like you come and go, easily replaceable, easily found again, that someone else would love them the same way, that there would always be another heart willing to endure what you endured, to give what you gave. But the truth is, people like you don't come around twice, not in one lifetime, not ever. At first, they feel free. That's the irony. When someone has been held up for so long by a loyal heart, they confuse that support for something they were entitled to. They begin to believe the love you gave was ordinary because you made it look so effortless. But it wasn't. It cost you. It broke you some days. It drained you to show up with the same energy, the same forgiveness, the same hope over and over again, even when they made no effort to meet you halfway. But now that effort is gone, and they're beginning to feel it. They search for someone who listens with the same gentleness, who waits with the same patience, who forgives without making them beg for it, but it doesn't happen. Because most people have boundaries, most people won't stay after being ignored, most won't care when they're mistreated, but you did. You stayed far past the breaking point, not because you were weak, but because you believed in the goodness that could be. You saw something redeemable in them and gave them the benefit of the doubt again and again. Now, in your absence, they're left with people who won't fight for them. People who match their energy instead of rising above it. People who mirror their emotional immaturity instead of challenging it with grace. And suddenly, the attention they used to crave feels empty. The conversations they once ignored feel dull. The games they used to play feel lonely, because what they're really searching for is you. But you are no longer available, not in the way you once were, not in the way they now desperately wish for. You see, they didn't just lose a person, they lost a version of you that was priceless. The version that loved them even when they were hard to love. The version that showed up without keeping score. That version doesn't come back, because once someone teaches themselves to stop begging to be seen, they stop offering their presence to those who are blind. Now, they scroll through old messages and feel the weight of your words. They remember your laugh, your kindness, your emotional depth, and realize they can't recreate it. They can't buy it, charm it, or demand it. Because what you gave came from a heart that chose them when it didn't have to. And now that your heart has chosen something else, peace, distance, healing, they are left with the haunting truth. No one else is you. And what they destroyed was once the rarest thing they ever had. Your absence will be their awakening. There is a silence far louder than any words could ever be. The silence that follows your absence, the stillness that takes over when the one who once carried the emotional weight, who held the space, who brought warmth into every cold moment is no longer there. That silence becomes deafening, and in that deafening void, reality begins to echo. They didn't expect it, not really. People like them rarely do. They thought you would always be there, like a light left on in the hallway, like a seat that's never taken, like a song they could play whenever they needed comfort, as they didn't notice how much you filled the air, until that air became heavy with the emptiness you left behind. At first, they feel relief, freedom. The absence of accountability feels liberating for a moment. No more having to face your questions. No more dealing with your emotional depth. No more reminders that they were being loved better than they deserved. But that moment passes quickly, because what comes next is the echo of every word you spoke with trembling patience, the echo of the way you said, "I'm here," even when you had every reason not to be. The echo of your laugh, the one that made even their worst days feel bearable. The echo of the loyalty they mistook as something they deserved, not something you chose to give. And as that echo grows louder, so does the realization. You weren't a burden. You were their balance. You weren't controlling. You were committed. You weren't dramatic. You were deeply invested. But they didn't see that while you were there. They couldn't. Because when someone's always present, always forgiving, always loving, people stop noticing how much effort that takes. They assume it's just who you are, not what you're doing. But the truth is, You were choosing them every single day, even when it cost you pieces of yourself. And now that choice is gone. Now they wake up and feel the cold where your warmth used to be. Now they talk, but no one listens the way you did. Now they get upset and no one calms them like you could. Now they're lonely in a room full of people because the one person who saw through the mask, who understood the silence behind their anger, who loved the scared child behind their arrogance, is gone. You didn't slam the door. You didn't leave with the storm. That's not your style. You left the way people like you always do, quietly. And that kind of exit is the most painful, because it leaves them with nothing to blame, no drama to distract, just the stillness, just the reflection, just the weight of themselves. And slowly, they begin to wake up. They start to see the pattern, how they've pushed away everyone who ever tried to love them, how they mocked what they didn't understand, how they chose ego over connection and comfort over truth. They remember how you looked at them with eyes full of belief they never earned, belief they took for granted. They remember your silence, not as weakness, but as the final act of strength, the final boundary, the final line they pushed you to cross. And in that awakening, shame sets in, because the hardest part of losing someone like you isn't just the absence, it's knowing they created it, that it was their actions or lack thereof that pushed you away, that the love you gave, the loyalty you offered, the space you held was never yours to keep. It was yours to give, and once it stopped being valued, you walked away with it. Now, every time they hear your name, it stings. Every time they see someone who resembles your grace, it aches. Every time they remember a moment they once shrugged off, it burns, because now they know what you gave was rare and what they lost was irreplaceable. Now, the tears are theirs to shed. There is a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the very pain they once dismissed is now finding its way back to them. Not through revenge, not through cruelty, but through life's quiet balancing act. What was once your suffering has now become their sorrow. The tears you shed alone, in the dark, with no one to comfort you, are now streaming down their face, but with one haunting difference. No one is there to catch them. They didn't see your pain when it was raw, when it lived in your eyes even as you smiled, when it cracked your voice mid-sentence, when it made you question your worth. They didn't notice how many times you choked back words you desperately needed to say because you didn't want to seem dramatic or needy or too much. They just saw someone who loved too hard and laughed at it. But your tears weren't weakness. They were the evidence of someone who cared deeply even when they had every reason not to. Every tear was a conversation you had to hold inside. Every tear was a moment of silence that screamed louder than words. You bled internally while pretending everything was fine on the outside, and they mistook your silent suffering for emotional simplicity. And now they know what those tears really meant. They cry now not because you hurt them, but because they hurt themselves by losing you, because they mocked the one person who loved them purely, because they ridiculed the very thing their soul now aches for. They cry because they are finally standing in the emptiness they created, and it is vast and it is cold. There is something brutally poetic about watching someone drown in the ocean they once laughed at you for navigating. The same depths they mocked you for feeling are now consuming them. They said you were too sensitive, too emotional, too intense. But now those same emotions are choking them. They're overwhelmed, confused, and broken. And this time, there's no one left to translate their pain into understanding, because the one person who did that for them is gone. These aren't just tears, they're regrets, liquefied and uncontrollable. They're apologies they'll never get to speak, they're memories they can't erase, they're images of your face, your smile, your sacrifices, haunting them at random moments, during songs, in crowds, in the quiet of the night when the world is asleep and the mind turns against itself. They cry now because the silence you left behind speaks louder than your presence ever did. They cry because they now understand what loyalty looks like. by missing the one person who gave it unconditionally. They cry because no one else puts up with their moods, their avoidance, their emotional walls. No one else loves them past the mess. No one else stays after the storm. No one else is you. And the pain they feel now is the echo of everything they once made you feel. The sleepless nights, the anxious mornings, the wondering if you mattered, the questioning if you were ever enough. Now they carry those questions like weights around their chest, and every tear is a reflection of a moment they could have chosen, you, but didn't. Now the world feels less bright. Their days feel more hollow. People around them feel colder because the warmth they once mocked is no longer theirs to reach for. They remember the safety of your arms, the steadiness of your voice, the calm in your presence, and it cuts deeper than they ever thought possible. That's the thing about taking people for granted. You never feel it when they're holding you up. You only feel it once they let go. And now they cry, not for what happened, but for what they let die, for what they broke and can never repair, for the love they laughed at, the heart they wounded, and the silence that followed, one that speaks volumes. So now you rise, not in anger, not in vengeance, but in quiet power. You're no longer the person begging to be understood, no longer the one sitting in silence waiting for someone to see your worth. You're no longer stretching your soul to fit into places that were never built to hold it. That chapter is over. You gave them the most sacred parts of yourself, your loyalty, your forgiveness, your presence, and they used it like a tool they could throw away once it no longer served them. But the story didn't end in your suffering. It transformed in your absence. You became stronger in the silence. You learned to hold yourself where others dropped you. You built new peace, new strength, and a new identity that no longer hinges on being needed by those who failed to value you. And now they sit in the same silence they once left you in. Only this time, there's no one coming to save them, no one to absorb their chaos, no one to shield them from the consequences of their choices. What once was mocked has become the very thing they long for. Let them cry now. Let them ache in the space where your love once lived. Let the silence remind them of what they shattered, because in the end, you didn't lose them. They lost you. And nothing they find will ever compare to the heart they laughed at until it stopped beating for them. You were never the fool, you were the lesson. And now they're learning.